What's up, friends? Welcome to SPDM TV. My name is Mike, part of the SPDM crew, and I watch a lot of TV. We talk about various TV topics, reviews, and general appreciation of TV, past and new. You could follow me on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Serialized at MLHilty2452 to see what all I'm watching. All right, this week we are talking about Rings of Power, which just wrapped up its second season earlier this month. Depending on when I release this, maybe last month. Well, we'll see. But I wanted to bring on somebody who knows Lord of the Rings really well because he's read a lot of the books, but also he's a genuine fan of it. I've talked to him before about Lord of the Rings. So no better person to talk about Rings of Power with than Robert Bouffard, who is the host of the Also See podcast, but also the manager or one of the managing editors for sifpop.com. So Robert, thanks for coming on. How's
hmm
it going?
It's going great. How are you? I'm glad to pop on here and talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, yeah. So just for context purposes, your article or your review of
Yeah.
it just came out not
hmm
too long ago from recording this, which I'll
hmm
be sure to link the article when this posts. Uh, so just general thoughts, like if you don't have to get into like any particular storylines, what did you think of seasons one and two? Like just general thoughts.
Sure. And just as a little preface, just in case some actual like Tolkien experts are listening to this, I'm not an expert. I like how they put it on the House of Art podcast. They said they're enthusiasts. Like they
Mm,
know a lot about it. They're really into it, but they're not experts. So like that's probably where I am, and even a little less so than those two hosts in terms of my knowledge. But I'm a big time fan. Seasons one and two, both I have thought were solid so far. I
mm,
have lots of mixed feelings on them. I think there's a lot of good to them. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. There's a lot of really compelling stuff, especially in season two. But there's also just a lot of stuff that leaves me a little befuddled and confused and frankly disappointed at some points, if not frustrated or a little upset because
mhm.
I didn't want Lord of the Rings to be turning into Star Wars this quickly, but it kind of seemed like it is in some ways. But there's enough good stuff that for now I do mostly like it.
I think befuddled is a good way to put it because there are
hmm
some very interesting choices that are being made from a story standpoint and from a character standpoint that when I watch it, I'm like, I want to see how this was the thing that you you decided to add into this giant story as a whole because there's a lot going on in this, and I would say
hmm
maybe about there's a two to two and a half storylines that are really strong. But then there's a couple that's like, why are you here? Like, sell this to me. And we're
Yeah.
kind of at a delicate point with this because wrapped up season two. I don't care what Variety reports on what Amazon says, because we talked about this beforehand. I don't see a whole lot of
Yeah.
buzz, not even bad or good buzz. I'm just not seeing a whole lot of buzz for this, period. And I don't understand how Amazon is going to push forward with this. But one thing that we're going to talk about is we'll give some thoughts on what Amazon is doing pretty well with this series so far and what Amazon needs to improve on for season three. But before that, as the Tolkien fan in this respects, I was expecting that I was going to be able to ask you some questions about what does this mean in Elvish or Dwarfish, but since you're not an expert
I'm
per
not quite
se,
there. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not fluent.
so I wanted to talk to you about some of the random references that came about
Yeah.
this season because I feel like more so this season there was a lot more references to be like, oh, that's a Lord of the Rings thing that I kind of picked up on, and I wanted to see if there's any that you picked up on as well. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is Tom Bombadil. And because
hmm
he's a major's maybe a strong way to put it, but he is a character in here that is
Notable. Yeah.
notable and has he's in more than one episode, and he is a big part of the quote strangers storyline. So what what do you know about Tom Bombadil, and why do you think he was included in this? Like, does it even make sense that he's included in this? Or just give me your thoughts on Tom Bombadil's inclusion in this.
So this is probably a good place to start that would just kind of get to my more existential issues with the show because there are good there's precedence to say I guess we could make up that he's here. And I've listened and watched like just about all the interviews from the cast and the showrunners for this season and read the interviews. For like the cast, for one thing, as an aside, is just incredibly charismatic and incredibly fun. And I kind of wish that came through a little bit more on the screen,
Mhm.
apart from these cast interviews. But Tom Bombadil as a character, I'm I don't know how much he's talked about in like the expanded writings and all that. I don't think he's in like the Silmarillion or anything like that. But the main source of his information is in the Fellowship of the Ring. When the hobbits are going like starting their journey, they stop at Tom Bombadil's house. And he's just like this weird dude who doesn't really care about what's going on in Middle Earth. He wants to keep to himself. It's not ever really clear what his whole deal is. He has this whole song. He's a merry fellow. His hat is blue and his boots are yellow. He's got a hot wife, girlfriend, concubine. I don't really know how they refer to Goldberry, but like it's just like she's hot and she lives with Tom Bombadil is basically all you know about
Mhm.
her. But like the thing in relation to the show is that it's weird because in the book, in Fellowship of the Ring, it's very clear that he doesn't really care about the goings on in Middle Earth. They talk about giving the ring to him, and he's like, "No, I'd probably lose it." He just doesn't really care enough to keep, like, even to keep it safe, you know.
Mhm.
But working backwards, the showrunners mentioned that they didn't know that. Oh, can I spoil who the stranger
Yeah.
is, or do you want to keep
Yep.
that? Okay.
Nope, you know what? We will give a spoiler warning at the beginning. I'll edit that in, that we are
Okay.
very much going to spoil this, particularly when it comes to the second part of our conversation, which is the things that Amazon is doing well and the things that Amazon is not doing
Yeah.
so well with this. So yeah, go ahead. Grand Elf, sure, that's what he's
Yes.
called, Grand Elf, and then it just
Uh-huh.
drop the R. It's
Sounds
cleaner.
mysteriously like something else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of rhymes with Gandalf. That's so weird.
That would make sense. I
Yeah,
know a guy named that.
yeah.
So the showrunners were working backwards. They said they didn't know that the stranger was Gandalf until writing season two, which is just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, why would you like that's one of my issues of like the show is about figuring out questions instead of what's already an interesting narrative about like how are we going to defeat Sauron. But they were like, okay, we got to do something with Gandalf now that we know that it's him after a full season of making the show.
Hmm.
Let's work backwards and say that he went and talked to Tom Bombadil, who there's no record of being that far east or
Hmm.
in the Second Age, let alone Gandalf being in the Second Age. So
Right.
they said when Gandalf leaves Middle Earth at the end of Return of the King, he mentions going to talk to Tom Bombadil. So they're like, you're not going to go meet new friends before you leave Middle Earth. So they must have been old friends. Let's fill in that blank. And all of that kind of makes sense on some level to me. Like if you want to have Gandalf in there and you want to have Tom Bombadil in there, that's an interesting way to do it. And that's like justifiable based on the text.
Sure.
But at the same time, we don't need to have them in the first place because I think we were saying this before we started recording. There's so much else going on that like revolves around a single like narrative question, like trying to defeat Sauron, that this just feels totally different
Hmm.
and tangentially connected at best, where it's like, I guess maybe I should go help Middle Earth is Gandalf's whole thing, and
Yeah.
that's about it. Like Game of Thrones has all these different characters, like Game of Thrones in its heyday has all these different storylines, but at least they're all like everyone's vying for the Iron Throne in one way or another. Even Daenerys, who's off in a completely different country,
That's her
uh,
goal. That's her goal at the end of the
yeah,
day, right?
she doesn't
Yeah.
know any of the other characters for the first couple seasons, but that's her goal. This one is
Hmm.
just like I guess. So that's why long-winded. It's just like it doesn't make perfect sense when you got so much else going on. Just feels like a way to be like, Tom Bombadil's never been on the screen. Let's be the ones to do it.
Yeah, first of all, shout out to Rory Keener for his role. He did really great as
Yeah.
Tom Bombadil. And just the character
Mhm.
was interesting in a lot of ways. It just it just feels like he was tacked on just to say, just for Amazon to say, hey, he wasn't in the movies, but we're giving the fans something that they've been clamoring for. And even so, is Tom Bombadil's inclusion just something that like all fans are clamoring for, or just some of the hardcore fans that are like, are we doing this to check a box, or is there a purpose here? And that's where I kind of
Yeah.
struggled with the storyline, let alone the storyline of the Harfoots the and Gandalf now as a whole, their
Mhm.
inclusion to this to begin with is something that is frustrating to say the least.
I yeah, I completely agree. I saw plenty of well, you mentioned how we don't see much social media reaction or buzz in general. I guess I follow enough Tolkien accounts that some of it does pop up, but like if you go to trending pages, it's like not really there, especially compared to like the bigger shows like Last of Us or Star Wars or Marvel or whatever.
Right.
But some people are like, this was the perfect way to introduce Gandalf. Have us fall in love with the stranger and then say that he's Gandalf instead of saying from the beginning and having everyone a little like on edge about being having a Gandalf that's not Ian McKellen. But to me, I'm just like, from the very beginning, from the very first episode, I was into it until it got to the Harfoots. And I'm like, wait, what? What are we doing? And
Hmm.
I've just been grumpy every time the Harfoots come on screen because the storyline is not interesting. The acting is good. I don't want to like disparage the actors. I like the performers. Like Daniel Wayman as the Stranger slash Gandalf, he's been good, but like it's just not interesting at all.
Yeah, from a story standpoint, it's just
Yeah.
I don't get it, which leads me to the next question. Is there a universe out there where this dark wizard that is looming in the background isn't Saruman? Is there,
Is there a
because
world where it isn't him?
yeah, well, like
Uh,
obviously there is, but because that's kind of what I'm predicting with this. He looks a little bit like Saruman, but
I know,
that's
yeah.
that's kind of the vibe that I got from that. But this dark wizard that's just looming, looking for Gandalf now. What do you think of that theory, I guess, and what are your thoughts on this inclusion of this dark wizard looming in the background?
I really hope it's not Saruman.
I agree.
Like because I know I've already kind of made it seem like I'm really into this needs to be, we need to have fidelity to the source material. There's not a lot of source material about the Second Age, and there's a lot to expand. My issue is more just throwing in things where they don't need to be. And having Gandalf and the Harfoots already is one of those. And adding Saruman, who's already like kind of evil, is another one. Because his whole deal was like the reason why it's a big deal that he's bad in Fellowship of the Ring is because him and Gandalf used to be friends.
Mhm.
And they used to be like on the same side. So if their introduction is him like killing a bunch of hobbits, it doesn't make much sense. But I agree. It kind of feels like they're setting him up to be Saruman, but also there's the two blue wizards who have never been in any adaptation. It would have been great if both of these guys were blue wizards. I would have been on board with that to a further extent than I am with Gandalf. But it doesn't make sense to do Gandalf and then one blue wizard, if that makes sense. It would be to me, it would be like either they're two blue wizards or they're Gandalf and Saruman. But I'm hoping I'm wrong and that it's a blue wizard or something else. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would much rather have that as opposed to going back to shoehorn characters in that we we know
Right.
already, and it also like kind of breaks my brain a little bit. Be like, how does this work from a timing standpoint? Because like I don't know, it's just interesting. It kind of reminds me of how in Better Call Saul when they started shooing in more Gus Fring storylines. Like
Mhm.
I get it that you need the gravity of Gus Fring to bring in, Saul a little bit more into this world, but I don't know, it just also didn't seem necessary as much because you could have had this be tacked on, maybe like off screen or like be alluded to as opposed to being as direct as they kind of did with Gandalf being like, "Yep, this is Grandalf, Gandalf. Yep, that's my name, I guess. I heard that." It's like, okay, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, and let's go to the Khazak Doom storyline, the Balrog, which has been
Mhm.
alluded to a lot, or in season one it was alluded to, and we finally get our first glimpses of it, which gorgeous, gorgeous shot of King Durin going after the Balrog.
Yeah.
But do you think that the inclusion of the Balrog was like incredibly necessary for this, or like from a story point it makes sense about this is the consequences of the ring corrupting Durin and him getting too
Mhm.
greedy and ambitious. But what do you think of the Balrog's inclusion in this season in this way, and do you think we're going to see more of it in the future?
Were you a little underwhelmed by it? It kind of seems like you were.
I don't want to say I was underwhelmed about it. I think aesthetically it looked amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
but for that to be it, it just makes like a brief appearance, and then
Mhm.
like the wall gets just caved in and now it's just trapped again. It's like we built up this entire story. The second part of the storyline in Khazak Doom where King Durin's got the ring, he's getting
Mhm.
greedy, he keeps digging further and further in, and this is the only thing to come of it. I don't want to say I was underwhelmed. I think I was just I would say I was probably the proper amount of whelmed with it,
Okay.
if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, for sure. I probably echo a lot of those thoughts, right? Where it's just this is what 2 seasons of storyline for the dwarves have been leading up to. And then also I don't really get why they look back to the rings at the end. Like they look during the fourth and Disa look at the dwarven rings and they're like, all right, we gotta use these. They just showed that all it was bad as soon as his dad put it on. So what shows them that it might be a good idea to use them? So I'm a little confused about that. As for
Yeah.
the Balrog specifically, yeah, it looks cool. I like its design. I saw a lot of people being like, that shot was awesome, where he's like jumping at it and like taking it on. My thought is like we saw how much strain and how much power Gandalf had to use to defeat this thing or to at least go down with it. What is one dwarf jumping at it with an axe really gonna do? Apart from, I guess, the motion is covering the hole with the rocks, I guess. Is that, like you said, is that like it can't break walls? Is that all?
Hmm.
I don't
Oh
know. It
yeah.
can't come back and defeat them.
It must be the strength of the mountain, but also don't underestimate the power of love and regret that that is what King Durin is using as his force to swing at
I
the Balrog with.
I guess. Yeah.
That's because if
Have you
anything,
seen? Oh, sorry,
oh,
go ahead.
just because the conversation that they had before the Balrog even shows up with the arm
Yeah.
wrestling
Uh-huh.
analogy, I thought that was great. I was much more fascinated in that conversation because when this series gets character driven like that, that is where the show really sings. It just doesn't do that enough. And we'll get to that a little
Yeah.
bit later. But like, I just feel like the inclusion of the Balrog was just another thing that was like, yep, here's another thing that you casual Lord of the Rings fans will remember from the original series.
Yeah.
And that's that.
I agree about what you're saying about like the dwarf conversations because that's what I wrote in my review that that's some of the best part of the show where these dwarves are just like talking about their relationships with each other and what it means to be a father and son, how it means to rate like for during the fourth to raise his sons, knowing his dad has been like to him and Jesus' influence there. That's all really interesting. And that's some of the best part of the show where they're just like doing human conversations because in Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, the dwarves have largely just been kind of silly. A little bit less so in The Hobbit because their desire to get the mountain back is the main thing, but like Gimli is the butt of the joke in most of the movies. And that's just kind of a casualty of trying to focus such a sprawling book into three movies. And that makes sense and I'm fine with it. But it's nice to see that. As for the Balrog and it being like a Leo pointing thing, it needs to kill Durin eventually. Like its name is Durin the Bane. So that makes sense. It's just the way that it was executed. Like it was gonna come about eventually, but the way that it's executed, him jumping at it is a cool shot. Have you seen Kong Skull Island?
Yes, I have.
All I was thinking about was that like all this guy needs to do is swat him out of the way and then come and kill the rest of the
And
dwarves.
that's
It's
and that's and
probably
that's realistically probably what should have happened, but
yeah,
everybody else in the mountain has plot armor for now. So
yeah.
yeah, I now that you've said that, it's one of those things that now I can't unsee it. And it's like, yep, that
I saw it immediately.
well,
Sometimes plot armor can feel organic. Like it makes sense the way that characters are getting out of things, but that to me, it's just a larger issue of the show where it knows beats that it wants to hit. It just doesn't know how to connect them very well.
right, right. Because like the other part of the storyline was they reference the door that, we see in Moria, and I'm sure or that leads into the
Yeah.
mines of Moria, which I'm sure probably does that door exist like in other dwarven areas where it's like, oh, your this door, the password in order to get into it, it's, only friends can do that. I'm like, I see what you did there. You're trying to reference that in and backdoor that in is as a way to just protect the dwarves. So, like,
Pun
do those
intended, backdoored in.
yeah, you got there before I did, so good for you. Is that how all the dwarven kingdoms are protected, or do you think that was something that was used as a way just to be like, remember that? I'm sure you do because that was a cool part in Fellowship of the Ring, but that's
Well,
it.
that door specifically is for elves to use to get into
Mm,
Khazad-dûm.
okay.
So that makes sense. But it also, like a lot of things that we have hit on and will continue to hit on, just like, all right, now we got to do this. They did it. Anyway, move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So it make like yeah, it's totally logical and it tracks to me that it's in there,
Hmm.
especially with the friendship between Elrond and Durin in the first season. It shows that these clans of elves and dwarves are friends or friendly in some level. So that makes sense to me. But like I said, just its inclusion and how they put it in. It's just
Hmm.
like, all right, check off that box and now move on.
Speaking of a check that box and move on, let's talk about the
Hmm.
the Eagles and how apparently the Eagles can dictate who is the ruler of Numenor.
Yeah.
In addition to them being the Deus Ex Machina of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy and such,
And the Hobbit.
and forget about that. But they can now have presidential or political picking power as well. So, to your knowledge, again, I don't want to paint the picture that you're the expert in this, but
Yeah.
as somebody that I'm leaning on as knowledge, what text do you remember of the Eagles being somebody who picks proper rulers in Lord of the Rings or any of the Tolkien verse?
Right. Yeah. So this is one where I don't really know. I know that Eagles were somehow involved in Numenor and their rulers, but yeah, it's just weird. I don't know. It just flies in and they're like, all right, I'm king now. And everyone's like, yeah, he's king now. And then it
Hmm.
flies away. What is the Monty Python line? Strange women and pawns distributing swords is no system or no base for a system of government. It's the same like Eagles showing up and saying hi and see things swimming around and leaving Muriel alone and a piece of paper coming to Farazan at the end of the season. It's just like, all right, here's random things that everyone's saying, like, this is the most weightiest thing that's ever existed, and it means I have divine right to rule. It's like I don't understand what Numenor is in the first place. Like, how are you deciding who's ruling other than an eagle showing up? It all just kind of is convoluted and unclear.
Yeah, that the Numenor storyline in general has a lot of potential,
I
but
agree.
that was one that was kind of confusing because the people of Numenor, because you wrote this in your review, they're very fickle in a way.
Yeah.
They're very flip-floppy and wishy-washy in a lot of ways because they they're just moving from ruler to ruler. They don't know who's leading them. Kind of wonder if Amazon is kind of subtly trying to tell us something about the current state of US politics. Like, but whatever. But it's just very interesting because I think they're kind of missing the mark with the Numenor story because who's ruling it is not what I'm concerned about at this point. But I don't know, like, do you have any other thoughts on kind of like the Numenor, like just the Eagle Numenor and what we can do moving forward to like make the storyline maybe just a tad bit more interesting?
Yeah, rehire Nicholas Adams, the guy who wrote the fifth episode. That's the one where all of a sudden it looked like Kemen is like a perfect Joffrey from Game of Thrones, where Isildur's friend, where he killed Isildur's friend, and they like destroy the idol or whatever. I thought that episode is honestly kind of great, and it's the only one of the only times in the whole show that I've really understood what was at stake in Numenor and why these people felt the way they did. The way he wrote the character dynamics made it interesting, and you understood how people, or like why people were in the situations they were and why they had the mindsets they did. It's looking back now, it's kind of jarring that that episode is well done, whereas the rest of it just makes no sense. I just saw they have almost a completely new writer's room for season three, not including Nicholas Adams, the guy, like I said, the sole writer on that episode. So it makes no sense to me why they let him go. But beyond that, it's just like go back to the human aspects of it and not just I want power, she wants power, he got power. It's like when it's Elendil and his daughter talking about their ideological differences, that's interesting. Or when it's Isildur's friend trying to defend his memory and all that, like that's interesting. But when it's just like I want power because the Palantir told me that I should have it, it's like okay.
Okay. Yeah, I will take your word for it at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly. Good for you.
So Isildur is one of those characters who obviously has plot armor because we need him to get to
Yeah.
he needs to be there at the end because kind of unfortunately vital to what we're ultimately leading to. But there's
Hmm.
there's a couple scenes involving Isildur and Isildur adjacent characters that I wanted to ask you about. The scene with Beric and Isildur and the spiders. Was that supposed to be a like was Shelob in there? Like or was it just like, hey, we want
Supposedly
to make
Shelob was in there,
okay, so
which doesn't make any sense
okay. I like
to
I
me. It's just like, okay,
like
you need an obstacle to for Isildur to overcome because he was presumed dead, needs to get back to some sort of civilization. So let's throw in spiders. That's a Tolkien thing. And let's say it's
sure.
Shelob because she's going to be there eventually around
Yeah,
this area.
yeah. Okay. I wanted to double check and see if Shelob is a bigger character than I'm giving it credit for, but it doesn't sound like it. And yeah, I it just seems like this is the next obstacle we need to get through in order for Isildur to get his beloved horse Beric back,
I know.
who Beric is obviously very important. But okay, that's all I wanted to talk about with the spiders. But one
Okay.
thing that I did want to chat a little bit more with you about are the Ents. The Ents make an appearance in this. What
Not only
future
the
do
Ents,
you
but the Ent wives.
we cannot forget about the Ent wives because they were criminally over or underrepresented in Two Towers and Fellowship of the or in Return of the King. But what do you foresee? Or like first of all, actually, let me go back. What did you think of the Ents
Sure.
inclusion in this? And did it make sense for you as a fan and as a TV watching person?
When there's episodes like this that aren't about like driving the narrative forward. And this is like a larger conversation about the current state of TV. Like that used to happen a lot. Like you mentioned, Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad Fly episode is like that's not really driving much forward, but like that was part of a 22 episode season.
Mhm.
These seasons are 8 episodes, and we got
Yeah.
to, keep it moving. So just to have an episode where they're like, let's go over here and run into Ents. That doesn't feel like it's going towards like the protection of Middle Earth and the fight against Sauron and the spiritual journey that Isildur and Theo are going on in Arondir. Instead, it just feels like we got to throw some Ents in here because we can. And
Mhm.
I think that episode, that was the one with the Ents, the Barrow Wights, and the introduction of Tom Bombadil, if I'm correct. And that episode made me very upset because that was literally just here's stuff from the movies and books,
It's a lot.
and
It's a lot.
that was it.
Yeah. Do you foresee the Ents do you foresee the Ents having more of a role in this, or was this, or do you think this is going to be a one and done type of thing? Like asking you to just speculate a little bit that if would you prefer to have more Ent-centric storyline as long as it makes narrative sense, or has it gotten to the point where it's like you did your thing, well, let's just leave it at that?
To me, anytime I'm seeing something like that, it feels pandery and it bugs me a bit. Expansion of other things like Galadriel's journey doesn't bug me because there's definitely, and I'm sure you want to get into that, but there's like definitely precedence for that in some of the writing. But when it's just like let's have a one-off episode with the ends. Here's a larger point, I guess. I think it would have been interesting if Arondir had died when he got stabbed by Adar in that second last episode, because that would have just been let's take a couple seasons to show that his whole deal is like adherence to the love of nature, because that is a very Tolkien idea. And if you just wanted to like have a character who was an expression of that theme, that would have made sense. Because he had to cut down the tree when he was in Mordor being held captive by the orcs in season one. And then they like confront him and like, have you ever cut down a tree? And he said, yes, but I regret it, or whatever he said. Like, that's interesting. That's about the love of nature. That's about an elf specifically going through that. But now it doesn't really feel like they have much for him to do because Bronwyn left the show, which is like outside of what happened
In the actual story.
in the show itself. The actress wanted to leave, yeah, which is fine. But like, they're just like, she's dead now at the beginning of the season. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, all right.
Oh,
But
that's yeah.
I don't know how else the ends could come in because that seemed like a good stopping point for Arondir's journey specifically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I don't know how prevalent the Ents are in any of the writings of Tolkien. I don't know if you know, yes, if the theme is just the preservation of nature, and it makes sense why the Ents would get so mad at Isengard because chop down all the
Mhm.
trees and Treebeard getting upset about that and calling the Ents to war. That makes sense from a narrative standpoint and how they would find a way to come into this battle. And also just I remember in the Two Towers when, the Ents take this long time to discuss, we're not going to get involved. And Pippin says, like, you're part of this world, aren't you? Or
Mhm.
maybe that was Mary. I don't know,
Mary says
but
that, yeah.
Mary says it. Sorry. But that just goes to show that like everybody in this is at risk, not just the elves or the dwarfs or anything like that. The Ents need to get involved with this too. And I don't see a path forward for how the Ents get involved with this unless they continue to chop down trees. Maybe that's maybe that's how, because they keep talking about how like, hey, we're gonna supply you with timber. Like all the side characters
Yeah.
and side things are leading to that, but I don't understand how that's going to ultimately lead to the Ents potentially stopping Sauron. Are they gonna retcon the the Ents in that giant battle in Mordor? Are they just going to be like, oh, on the other side of the mountain, the Ents were fighting the orcs as well?
As
Okay.
long as we don't get a young Treebeard, I think I'll be all right.
Why are you putting that energy out there?
Because
Because
the show is putting it out. The show is giving me precedent to brace myself for things like that.
That's that is fair. So I wanted to talk about there are two lines in here that I was like, okay, you added this in here just to be like, oh, okay, like let's go from there. And the first line, because you wrote in your review, and I wholeheartedly agree that the most
Mhm.
fascinating part of this season is the storyline between Sauron and Celebrimbor, and
Yep.
that was their storyline is great. But the inclusion of the you will be the Lord of the Rings, is that how it's referred to in any of the text, or is that just a way to be like, he said it, he said it, roll credits to get a CinemaSins is in the ism in there, but is that how it's properly referred to in the text, or where did that come from? Because it felt a
Uh,
little pandery and shoot in, but maybe I'm wrong
I mean, there's not much dialogue from this,
from this
uh,
age. Yeah.
yeah, this time. So like that line wasn't directly said by Celebrimbor to Anatar slash Sauron. So on that level, it's fine. Or I see what you mean. But to me, Sauron is the Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
So I like the idea of Celebrimbor getting like this one last heroic stance where he knows he's dead anyway. So let him get all of his epic stuff out, say
Mhm.
all the cool stuff that he's been holding in now that he is out from under the spell that he's been under. So to me, that one didn't bother me. I thought that was a cool line. And it was probably the one part of the finale that I did like.
So actually, that line I thought was great. I'm talking about the one earlier in the
Oh,
season when Sauron
oh,
or is trying to
right. Yeah.
he's using it as a way to seduce Celebrimbor, which I thought made sense. It's like you will be the Lord of the Rings. And then for
Uh-huh.
Celebrimbor to use that at the end as a way to be like, no, you're not in charge of these rings. The rings are in charge of you. Like I thought that
Hmm.
was a great callback and a great way, like you said, for Celebrimbor to use do say that as part of his last stand. I'm talking about the part earlier in the season where it's like you will be the clouds part, the sun shines, the Lord of the Rings. Like, okay.
Well, like you were just saying, I think it's a good way to set up like an arc, a piece of an arc for Celebrimbor to
Yeah.
be like, you said I was going to be Lord of the Rings. No, it's going to be you, but actually they're in charge of you. So I do still think that that was cool because Anatar's whole thing is that he's just manipulating Celebrimbor this whole time.
Yeah.
Uh, he's playing on his hubris and his ambition, and that's the perfect thing to say. Like the Silmarils are the greatest accomplishment of craft in the history of Middle Earth, but the rings could be higher, could be better. So to say, not only will you just create these rings to call him the Lord of the Rings, that's a cool title, and I'm sure, and it was enticing to Celebrimbor. It helped him continue forward for another 4 or 5 episodes, however long it was.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I thought it was
Yeah.
cool.
Now that you frame it in the way, as long, from a setup standpoint, okay, I will
Yeah.
get off my high horse with that.
I'm
There's
not
one other.
completely against every single part of the show. Like there are things that
Oh,
I think
there.
do work.
Oh, yes, I'm in the same boat as you as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's fun for to take a look and to analyze some of this stuff. I'm not saying it's fun to rip a show to pieces because I don't like doing that at all. Because every
Right.
show or everything has good things that they do, and we want to acknowledge all of that. And there's a line that Tom Bombadil says to Gandalf, the some choose death, others choose life. Who are we to judge them? Kind of inferring that Gandalf got that from Tom Bombadil and says that to Frodo in Fellowship of the Ring. That's just another. There's a few lines like that kind of sprinkled in
Uh-huh.
throughout the series. And what are your thoughts on some of the lines kind of being like retroactively retconned as like origins of that? And like, yeah, just get some just general thoughts on that.
How I've been referring to it like since the middle of the season, since it was pretty clear at a certain point that this was going to be Gandalf, that this is like the movie Solo, the Star Wars movie with Alden Ehrenreich, but not knowing that he's Han Solo from the beginning. It's like, and here's where he got this part of like here's where Gandalf gets his staff. Here's where he learns this line. Here's where he learns how to do this magic. Here's how he meets the hobbits. That's what it's been feeling like to me.
Mhm.
And I like the movie Solo. Like I think it's fun, but what works about it the least is when the guy's like, you're alone. We're gonna call you Han Solo. You know, and oh, actually, your gun was longer, but it's shorter now, so that's how he got his iconic gun. You know, all these little or blaster, sorry, Star Wars. That's how that's the stuff that bothers me in that movie, and
Yeah.
that bothers me here very much
Hmm.
so, especially when it's lines like that, which are so meaning. Like it's probably my favorite moment in all of Lord of the Rings. The many that choose death deserve life, or however the line goes. All
Yeah,
we have to
yeah,
decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. That whole thing. That line was my senior quote in my high school yearbook, you know. I've had it for 10 plus years in my mind. So just to like see it so offhandedly thrown in there, that does bug me. Just like I thought I was annoyed by now Gandalf saying always follow your nose at the end of season one because he says that in Moria in Fellowship of the Ring.
yeah.
But like this is even worse. Like, come on.
Yeah, because you're trying to throw something in that, you know, I would say casual to intermediate fans will recognize because that is such an iconic part and
Yeah.
line from Fellowship of the Ring when they're talking about Gollum. And like honestly, if they would have just continued to add that, because you're right, that line where all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. That is one of my favorite quotes, not just a movie quote or anything like that. It is one of
Hmm.
my favorite quotes of
Hmm.
all time because it's so applicable to so many different aspects of our lives. But to have it shoehorned in just for the sake of an Easter egg feels like it's cheapening a little bit the meaning behind it. And also it didn't make a whole lot of sense in the context that it was said in. And it's
Wasn't
like
it
you're
like he was Tom Bombadil was implying don't go save your friends and go
yeah,
fight Sauron instead? It turns out it was all a test and like just to make it like a Luke on Dagobah thing
yeah,
makes it even more frustrating.
yeah. Oh, yeah. So the last
Um,
thing, oh,
the
go ahead. Go ahead, sorry.
if oh, just real quick, if Tom like if we're just accepting that Tom Bombadil is training Gandalf, like putting aside that we're frustrated that that's happening, but like accepting that's happening, and then his test is to be like, go fight Sauron or go save your friends, and Gandalf decides to go save his friends because in the long run that's gonna help fight Sauron and just like put out good into the world. That I think add would add interesting extra heartfelt context to the line in Fellowship of the Ring because as Gandalf is saying, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. We think about, oh, here's what he chose to do with his time. Frodo can now choose to do a similar thing and save his friends, you know. But instead, it's just like, just so you know, it's like I know writers who use subtext and they're cowards. That's basically it.
Yeah, yeah. We'll just leave that one there.
Okay.
The last thing, because this came about from a question that I got because I was watching the final couple episodes with a friend, and it has to do with Galadriel and
Mhm.
Elrond. And they're like, are they like, do they ever end up together? And I was like, I don't know. Do like, do I want them to ever end up together? Not really, but because
So you don't
that
know
is
their relationship then, do you?
well, I know
Like what
that
it eventually is?
I know that right now that they're really good friends, but I guess
Right.
this is where what is their relationship moving forward? I don't care if you spoil it for me, but
Well, by the time that we get to Lord of the Rings, like the books and mo slash movies, Galadriel is Elrond's mother-in-law.
okay, there you go.
She will have a daughter, and that's who Elrond marries and has Arwen with Aragorn's Arwen.
Oh,
So yeah.
well,
So read that how you will, the kiss, which I'm sure you're leading to.
yeah, yeah. The kiss had a specific function to it. It's not like it was like a completely romantic thing. He uses it as a distraction to get close to Galadriel to give her the lockpick, which
Hmm.
you could see that's what he clearly does. It's not like it's a secret or anything like that. But there's a lot more controversy around that kiss than that I gave it credit for because that's something that has come up. There's a couple threads that I saw that was like, I can't believe that they would include that kiss. Why would they do that? And I was like, I mean, I don't have a problem with it, unless they move forward with them potentially being in a relationship moving forward. But by what you said, that's not the case. But did you have a problem with the kiss? And if so,
Uh,
why? Or no, or if you
my
didn't, then
my only problem with it was that it's contrived and kind of dull,
yep.
and just like a boring, easy way for him to sneak something to her. On a larger, meta Tolkien level, like it doesn't bother me. I see people going crazy, thinking everything's desecrated, yada yada. But it's like I see what he's doing. If you think of a kiss for the elves as something that's like non-romantic, non-sexual, just like here's two really good friends saying what they think is a goodbye forever because they say like her head is going to be on a spike next time you see her. It's like, all right, that's fine. I don't know.
Mhm.
It to me, I didn't get too worked up over it.
Yeah, it didn't really bother me because it also had a function as well. Like he,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
saying goodbye and also trying to get her to escape. The very last shot
Also, the
of
face that Galadriel makes when he pulls away is really funny to me. She's just like totally confused.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
all right, I guess that's what we're
I
doing.
guess I
And I
guess I
think that
guess
just helps.
I
Like,
I I guess that's what happened, but okay. Cool. Yeah, I
to me,
will.
that helps show that it's not a romantic thing. She's not like they both came away with like stars in their eyes or anything.
Right. The last I think it's the last part of this. Is this are we getting the origins of Rivendell
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
in this? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I could
Elrond
get on.
goes and founds it, and that's all like legit. And what happens? They go off and form Rivendell as like a haven for the elves after all their places keep getting destroyed.
I can get on board with that. I thought that
Hmm.
part was cool where it's like I think it would have bothered me more if Elrond would have been like, we shall call this place
I know. Yeah.
Rivendell. I'm like, okay, but for that to be implied and be like, we need this to be a safe haven after Region is just decimated and utterly destroyed at this point. It makes sense that they would need a refuge for all of these elves who have just been displaced
Right.
by this attack. So those were some of the references that I wanted to hit on. Did you have anything else that you were like from a reference standpoint that you were like either thought was a good to okay inclusion or some that you were like, why is this here?
Well, the last one I mentioned it earlier was the Barrow Wights, which Galadriel and Elrond and their little company fight briefly. They're like
Yeah.
the ghost looking guys.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
The hobbits also encounter those in the Fellowship of the Ring book. To me, that just felt like we got to put in some action in this episode.
Hmm.
And it was like, and again, that was the same episode, I think, with the Ents and with Tom Bombadil's introduction. I was just in a bad mood after I watched it because I was like, this episode did nothing.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's the last one that I can really think of, though. Everything else works out. Oh, no, the main one. You were saying this before we hit record, but that when you were in Hobbiton, they said they might be shooting some Rings of Power there in a couple of years. Is it because like they're talking about the Suzat, right? That they want to go and find the Suzat when they meet these other Harfoots in Rune. That is the Shire. Like I think it's pretty clear that Nori and Poppy and her boyfriend, I guess,
I heard,
they
I guess, yeah.
whatever, that they're gonna go found the Shire. So if that's what that's about, that also bugs me because the Second Age, like when it gets into like people's coming together, but also just a lot of despair, that really feels like what it's supposed to be. But when it's like, no, we're all gonna be friends and the Shire is gonna form, that's like distinctly Third Age. That's distinctly like Frodo and Sam and Lord of the Rings. Like
Mhm.
that, not Sauron as Lord of the Rings, but like the story of the Lord of the Rings is so that's inclusion. That's what bugs me. And if part of like this very limited time that we have with Rings of Power includes going to found the Shire, which it very clearly looks like it's going to be. That just feels like a big waste and big missed opportunity when, like we've been saying, Numenor is getting the short shrift and Isildur is like Isildur's gonna found Gondor, so him like telling them about aqueducts and stuff, that's cool. I'm like, all
Mhm.
right, here's the first steps of him founding Gondor, and even him like getting a girlfriend. I'm like, oh, because he's Aragorn's descendant, so I guess sure, let's show that he has kids. But
Mhm.
instead it becomes like a love triangle thing, and I'm like, okay, like instead of doing that, get rid of all the hobbits and spend more time with him, being in love and founding this area. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good call out for the Shire because yeah, if the finding of the Shire is part of this, are we also going to spend an entire season, of them like building this giant tower in Mordor, or are we gonna get all of this stuff where it's like, remember this from the Lord of the Rings movies? We can't have anything Lord of the Rings related without including all the stuff from films that you loved or were lukewarm on, depending on your feelings about the Hobbit movies. But I mean, I feel like this is a good segue into the what is Amazon doing well and not so well portion of this conversation. And let's start with the things that Amazon's not doing well, because then I want to end with the things that Amazon is doing well with this, because it does sound like we're shitting on this a lot, even though
Hmm.
we both enjoy it, but we're seeing the issues with unrealized potential. And like for me, like one of the things that Amazon's not doing well is that they're jamming way too much in
Hmm.
to these stories. And not only are they jamming way too much in, they're jamming way too much in that has nothing to do with some of the, A plot lines that are working really well versus some of these like side questy things or things that don't really matter at the end of the day. But that to me, that's one thing that I'm a little frustrated with on Amazon's front, because they also have ample evidence of why throwing in so much stuff isn't going to work, because it's not working with the House of the Dragon. Didn't work with the Fantastic Beasts franchise, and it didn't work with, well, we'll just leave it at those two right now. But they're just jamming too much in, and it's detracting from some of the more interesting plot lines that we could be spending more time on when, like you said, there's only 8 episodes to a season. So why are we wasting our time with, all we have to decide is what we're doing with the time
Hmm.
that's given to us. And the choices that they're making are at minimum making me scratch my head, and at max kind of frustrating me a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a point and now I lost it. But no,
Yep.
I agree that
Yep.
I personally I gave up on House of the Dragon like halfway through the first season because it
That's
just wasn't what thought wasn't what interested me about Game of Thrones. And the actors kept changing too much. So I don't even know what people are upset about season two. Like that seems to be a very hot button topic. But I definitely understand the Fantastic Beasts, like that those movies are not good.
no, they're not.
I remember what I was gonna say now. The
Okay.
I wanted to draw a distinction between just Amazon like as a studio and as Suits
Okay.
and between them and the showrunners.
Okay.
Because if you listen to and read stuff from the showrunners, it feels like or it's very apparent that they have deep love and appreciation for Tolkien and all of his works and his lore and all that. But also their credits are like uncredited work on Jungle Cruise and Star Trek, like the third Star Trek
Oh,
movie with
Beyond.
Chris Pine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Beyond. Thank you.
you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like Star Trek Beyond. I like Jungle Cruise. I don't, but like just that is just not a lot of experience, and that lack of experience is showing. So I think
Mhm.
that's very apparent in terms of how things play out on the show. But I do wonder, and I don't think we'll ever know the answer to this, but I wonder if there was some mandate that you got to include Gandalf and hobbits because that's what the main characters of both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings was. Because otherwise, I think these guys seem passionate enough about Tolkien and knowledgeable enough about Tolkien that they could have done a very good, contained, tight
Mhm.
series. Like we keep saying, like if it like 10 to 15 minutes of screen time per episode towards the hobbits and Gandalf going towards other stuff is a whole lot, like so I don't know whose choice that was, but whoever it was, I think it's a very poor choice. And I think this whole episode, honestly, of this podcast has been about what Amazon is not doing well because you said it's like we're just been shitting on it the whole time.
Hmm.
That's because it's all about we've just been talking about the references, and
Yep.
that is the worst part of the show, in my opinion,
Hmm.
because there's plenty of good too, or else I wouldn't have kept watching this far.
True, true. So we've got the references, we've got, the overstuffed plot. And I shouldn't say it's just all Amazon because, like you said, it's not like Amazon is just sitting in its tower and being like, you need to do this and everything like that. Sure, they have say and maybe final say, but you know,
Mhm.
it takes a village to make, productions of this scale. But before we get into some of the positives and things that we liked, is there anything else in particular that you're like, they need to, that either this season or something that you'd like to see moving forward that you think needs to be improved upon for for Rings of Power?
Really, no, because I really feel like there's just a couple issues with the show, but those
Mhm.
issues are huge. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like it's the pacing and the overall over fidelity to references and what's come
So,
before. You
yeah.
know, if you just let the show be its own thing and keep on the writers who know how to do good character work, honestly, like that's the main thing.
Because
Then yeah.
because because the character work, I would say character work on maybe about a third to half the characters is actually really strong. But
Hmm.
then for some of them, it either doesn't matter or it's not cohesive enough to the larger narrative. And I guess that's where I would kind of transition into some of the things that Amazon and the series is doing really well is that when the character work works, like it's really well. Because you mentioned that storylines that you liked, the Anatar and Celebrimbor stuff was the best part of the season, which I wholeheartedly
Hmm.
agree with you because if we would have gotten more focus on that as opposed to splitting off into all these different things, it would have made the finale better, but it also would have made that penultimate episode with the Siege of Eregion maybe a little bit more or a little bit better too, right? So
Yeah.
talk to me about what you liked about that particular storyline and what can the series do moving forward in order to highlight more things like that?
I think that storyline showed that at its heart, this is a show about Sauron, right?
Yes.
And everyone else is just kind of hovering around him, trying to find ways to stop him or align with him, though not many people are trying to align with him.
Well, unless you're orcs who get seduced all of a
Right.
sudden to, betray their creator,
Father?
leader,
Yeah.
and watch, and then ultimately get betrayed right afterwards as well. So cool.
See, though that worked for me, the at least the part of being betrayed right again, just like
No,
shows
it
Sauron is unfeeling and brutal. Yeah.
it made sense. Like, and I was like, oh, that's a bit of a bummer. But it still sucked that it just happened so soon. But I get it. I
Yeah.
do get it. But yeah. But anyways, continue. Sorry.
No, the way I'm kind of seeing it, and I don't know if this is going to continue, but it actually probably could at some level. The first season was about Sauron, and I don't mean this in, our American sense, like seducing Galadriel,
Oh
though
yeah.
that kind of did happen
Kind of. Yeah. Mhm.
romantically. And then this season was about him doing it to Celebrimbor. Not to give out too many spoilers, but he's going to head to Numenor eventually, so he could do that. He could do it there as well. So I like how it's kind of structuring it. So one or each season he is like kind of just getting into the mind and heart of one particular character and showing his power and how manipulative and like magnetic he is as a being.
Right.
And that's kind of what makes your initial question, what makes the storyline with Celebrimbor so interesting, that it just completely devotes itself to that idea and we get so much depth to both of their characters and see what they're like and see just how Sauron is able to manipulate this character, get at his weaknesses, get at his faults, get at the things that make him tick to manipulate him to do exactly what Sauron wants him to do. That I don't know if I have a negative thing to say about anything about Sauron and Anatar the entire
Oh
season.
no, no, absolutely not. Because there's so many different layers to what Sauron is doing in this. He is laying the foundation for Eregion to just be laid to waste. He is driving all the other, all the other ringmasters or whatever. That's not what I'm trying to say, but all these other people against Celebrimbor, and he's also
Yeah.
trying to drive Celebrimbor to make these destructive devices. Like the scene where Celebrimbor discovers that the mithril he got, it's like, nope, this isn't mithril. Sorry. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, that was great. And all all the flowers also go to Charlie Vickers. Charlie
Yeah.
Vickers is my favorite performance in this, and it's not even close as well.
My only other one would be Charles Edwards as Celebrimbor, who I
Well,
think they're 1A and 1B, and
mhm,
who's A and who's B is interchangeable to me. I
yeah.
like I said, both of them are great. Looking at like all the promo images in that poster with Charlie Vickers with like the blonde wig, I was like going into the
What?
season, it's like, oh no, this is gonna be rough. Like
Mhm.
I'm trying to be on the side of the show. I'm trying to stay on it, but that looked rough. But the way that he like goes into the fire and then comes out and is like, you know what, I was lying to you, but only because I'm better than you think, and it like and he wins over Celebrimbor. Like that whole thing and how he becomes the Anatar form, I thought was really well executed and really cool. And yeah, both those performers are great.
I'm looking at another poster right now of Celebrimbor just looking completely disheveled. Like he's holding a ring to the fire, or I think
Mhm.
he's holding all nine of the rings and he's trying to drop them in the fire.
Right.
And just he looks so disheveled and broken. Like that conversation that they have at the end of at the like in the final episode, it's probably one of my favorite scenes of television all year. And in a year that has had some pretty amazing scenes and sequences, that converse just the hell that I'm sure Anatar slash Sauron, because he just reveals himself at that moment,
Mhm.
is was just underscores just how much hell that he puts all these people through in order to get something that he just selfishly wants. I do wish that that same gravity would have translated a little bit more to the fight between Galadriel and Sauron in the
Yeah.
finale.
Too many people just jumping off cliffs to get out of situations. Like it's weird that it happened twice in this season. Elrond jumped into the water in the first episode, and then Galadriel just jumps off a cliff into the forest to get away from Sauron.
You wouldn't jump off a cliff to just, escape from potential death or arrest or something along those lines.
I guess elves are like they got strong, but they drink their milk because
Mhm. Mhm.
that fall in real life would kill you into the water, and then especially into the forest.
Because we kind of talked a little bit about Galadriel's journey throughout this
Hmm.
season, and I guess let's talk about it a little bit more because she seems like a character that's sidelined character like a lot more this season,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not sure if that was just a choice based on like some feedback, like, oh, we need to see less Galadriel, or if that's something where we want to focus a little bit more of our attention on other things. But that seemed like an odd choice when Galadriel was such a focus of season one. And to have her kind of take a little bit of a sidestep where you get glimpses of her being like kind of like seduced by the ring and wanting to, you know, utilize like witnessing the power that it can have and wanting to use some of that power for herself. But then you don't get to see a whole lot of that. And then we get an interesting part where she's captured and the negotiations for like what we have a common enemy and we can defeat Sauron together. And then I don't know, like what did you think of Galadriel's storyline this season and kind of the journey that she went on? Because it felt rushed, and which goes to your pacing issue, but it
Mhm.
also just felt a little unfulfilling.
I think the benefit of the structure of the show is that there are so many characters that could be leads of any episode or of any season. And I think it was a good choice to make her the lead for the first season because Galadriel is just one of the most prominent people, especially in the third age of Middle Earth. So just to see how she got to be that person in the beginning of that. So I don't mind honestly that she was sidelined in season two because she just the structure of the story didn't have as much to do. There wasn't much like yeah, there just wasn't a lot for her to do. And there were other more important things going on. So I think if it had focused more on her instead of on like the creation of the rings, it probably would have been a big mistake. She's still there. She's still doing stuff. I don't know where they're going to take her next, but I do. We don't have to get into this, but like there's been lots of quote unquote anti-woke backlash towards Galadriel and her being the lead of the series. But I actually do like her arc from the beginning. If you look at her in season one compared to Kate Blanchett, right? I'm already able to start drawing the line to how she gets there.
Hmm.
And she's already kind of like at the beginning of season by the beginning of season two, she's already toned it down a bit. And then especially by the end of season two, she's doing that,
Hmm.
given everything she's gone through, being stabbed by the crown and being healed by the rings and realizing that, hey, maybe we need to regroup and figure some things out. Her thing with Adar is like, that didn't really amount to much. So I get it there. I agree with you there.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't be surprised if like eventually she goes off and founds Lothlorien, somehow is reunited with Celeborn, her husband, however that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Got to get that somehow. But yeah, I wouldn't mind a time jump between seasons. I think that would be a little helpful, perhaps. But with her as a character, I think she's honestly on a good path, even though there were
Hmm.
some parts this season that were a little questionable.
And I guess it's consistent. I guess that like feel a lot of characters maybe fade into the background a little bit more to focus a little bit more attention on, kind of the focus of this season, which I'm okay with. Like
Mhm.
I like the lack of Elrond this season, like I'm okay with that because I know he's got a bigger role to play at some point, but you see the pieces that they're putting into place to show, his military prowess and his leadership and how he can think for himself and he's resisting the ring as much as
Mhm.
possible. He recognizes the dangers that these rings pose. And the scene where him and Durin meet up again, I love that. And I thought I was going to be like, man, I missed this throughout the season, which I did, but I'm hoping that we get more of that in future seasons and
Mhm.
continue to have their friendship explored because Robert Amayo, I believe that's his name, as
Aramayo, yeah.
Aramayo as Elrond. He's another casting choice that in season one I was like, yeah, you're fine, you're good. But this season I think I'm finally to the point where it's like I really like his interpretation of Elrond and what he's bringing to the table to his character and the series as a whole as well.
He's been one of my favorites the whole time. I like the gentleness that he brings as a character,
Yeah.
as an actor. Yeah, I really like Robert Aramayo as a performer.
One other thing that I do like, and you alluded to this earlier, the treatment of the dwarves and how
Oh yeah.
the dwarves were like sidelined for a lot of the original trilogy because it's just Gimli. That's about it. And
Yeah.
which if that's how it happens in the books, fine, so be it. But like they kind of make the dwarves these these or not the dwarves, these the elves, these lethal assassins who are like the elite of the elite in Middle Earth. And in this season, we get, oh, the elves actually need the dwarves in order to, fight off the everything in Eregion. And that's like, were they ultimately successful? Kind of, because they backed away the orcs, but Eregion is just gone and destroyed now.
Yeah.
But I do love that the dwarves are finally getting a little bit of their time in the sun, kind of a pun intended. But I want to see more dwarf storylines moving forward, even though this season they've already given them their rings and they've shown how they what what the rings have been able to do with them, but I'm curious to see what the dwarves have moving forward. So what did you think of the dwarf storyline this season and what do you want to see from them moving forward?
Well, yeah, I'm curious about the expansion of the show. I feel like it is going to expand to more characters that we haven't seen. They say something about Durin's brother coming to lay claim to Casa Doom. There are seven dwarf rings. We know who has one of them. Like, who are the other six going to? Same for the nine rings for men. So I don't really know much about the like what could be coming based on the source for the dwarves. So I'm just interested to see that.
Mhm.
I hope that like it doesn't lose focus
Mhm.
because that's the one thing that I'm a little concerned about going forward. Now that far and away the best storyline of the entire show, the first two seasons, is over, Celebrimbor and Sauron, what are we gonna have as like a good anchor going forward, if anything? Like our like supposedly this is gonna be a 5 season show. So at the end of 5 seasons, are we gonna look back and be like, man, they really peaked in season two with Celebrimbor and Anatar? Or are we gonna say, hey, that was a good jumping off point for them to do a lot of other good things?
Mhm.
I'm worried it could be the former, but obviously I'm hoping it's going to be the latter.
Oh, for sure. What putting your fan slash Lord of the Rings enthusiast hat on, what would be something that you think could get, could potentially at minimum be on par of a storyline between Celebrimbor and Anatar?
Well, like I said, Sauron's got to head to Numenor,
Numenor,
so
yeah, yeah.
if they can figure out how to write that in any convincing way, which
Mhm.
they haven't so far, but if it ends up being good, like if it works out, then I think that could be
Well,
on par with this.
Well, the interactions that Sauron has had with Galadriel and Celebrimbor have been any indication there there is hopefully trust that they can make the Numenor situation be salvaged due to just Sauron's inclusion in that
Sure.
because Numenor, I don't know anything about Numenor. I do know what happens
Mhm.
ultimately with it. I'm just kind of struggling to see how we get from where we're at now to where it's going to end up eventually. And I guess all I can do is trust that they're going to figure it out to some extent or another. But because it feels like that's where they're going moving forward is that these nine rings are going to have to be distributed at some point
Yeah.
or another. And who do they go to? Like are we going to be introduced to all nine of those people? Is that what's season three and season four are going to be about? I don't know. Are we going to get a scene where it's like, here are, you know, here are the rings, and now you will all become Nazgul. No,
Right.
yes. I would not want that because I don't care at the end of the day, and that's just another reference point. But I think, but the key thing there that would be interesting is if, how is he going to convince all of these men that, probably not a lot of convincing because men love power
Right.
in Lord of the Rings and kind of in general. But it's not going to be that hard of a stretch, but I still want to be there to see how he's going to go about doing that. What are what are some other things that you think that the series is doing well?
Well, just to respond to one of your points real quick, I wouldn't mind if we just see the men corrupted and just become
Hmm.
Nazgul because that's kind of what happens and it has to happen. Like that is part of the lineage of from the Second Age and Sauron's rise to his downfall at the end of Lord of the Rings, as opposed to like throwing in Tom Bombadil and the Hobbits just for the sake of it. Yeah, excuse me. People have been speculating since the beginning of the show who's going to become the Witch King, who's going to become a Nazgul, this and that. So I think that is an interesting thing. Like we don't know who the nine kings of men are, so it could be anyone. As for other things the show is doing well, we've done a lot of shit talking towards Numenor, but I would not I am interested to see where Elendil and his storyline goes. We haven't really mentioned him much.
Yeah.
He's going to find on the west side of the island Anarion, his other son, Isildur's brother. Anarion and Isildur are the guys who found Gondor in like where Aragorn's from. So just to see his introduction is going to be interesting to me. And I think there's a good enough base for Elendil as a character and his like Ned Stark was always my favorite Game of Thrones character just because I'm always attracted to the guys or to the characters who are like resolute in their dedication to doing right and to being honorable. And Elendil is very similar in this show. So I think they've done a good job of crafting his character. So I'm interested to see how they're gonna integrate him finding an Arion and Isildur getting back to Numenor. So that's kind of half answer your question of what it's doing well versus what I how I think it can continue to do well going forward.
I guess I should amend the thing with the Nazgul because I don't seeing that whole process, yes, I'd be very interested in that. I just don't want a situation where he gives the rings out and then eventually he just like execute Order 66 and then all of a sudden
Yeah,
they just now I have my Nazgul like
sure. Yeah.
just like seeing that process, seeing how quote unquote the sausage is made, yes, I'd be very interested in that storyline. But I just don't want it to be like a tacked on thing where they just say Nazgul or call them ring wraiths or anything like that and just call it a day. Like, um,
Yeah.
I think that's just lazy story writing, and I think I give the show a little bit more credit than maybe it might deserve. But I think that the show has shown capabilities that their writing can be strong, even if their dialogue isn't great at times. And if they can make a compelling storyline involving Sauron and, seducing all these men to, take these rings and then just have all of their downfalls, which ultimately leads to like all the last alliance of men and elves to go forth and go destroy the ring. Uh, yeah, I'll take that all
Yeah.
day, every day. Because,
I forgot real
oh,
quick.
go
Did
ahead.
Sauron end up with the rings at the end of the season?
Yeah,
Okay. So yeah. At
he's
least there's not like he needs to keep chasing it like he has them. So hopefully he's going to start distributing them pretty early on in season three.
yeah, because Galadriel had them. He like stabs her with the crown, which that just looked painful, and like it did kind of give me like lightsaber vibes. It's like is getting stabbed by a crown just like not enough to kill an elf now? Because
And jumping off a cliff, right? Yeah.
and can't forget about jumping off a cliff, but also is quite a choice to have Elrond put the ring on to heal Galadriel and such, but after he's resisted it for so long. But if there's going to be anything that's going to push him to that, sure.
Mhm.
Okay. If any indication of what's to come is from the action scenes from from the seventh episode, the Eregion episode, I'm cautiously optimistic that they can continue to build upon that from the action pieces. But also the issue is that it's flashy, it's pretty, but that's not why I'm here at the end of the day. I want more genuine character work and like more intriguing storylines, and that action piece could be like a cherry on top, but I don't want it to do what Game of Thrones did, where it's like, okay, we're just going to talk about this battle for a long time, and this battle is it. And I don't want that to be what we're leading up to, but I'm cautiously optimistic that the action scenes were good generally. And
There weren't a ton of them, right? I there was the obviously the Siege of Eregion, and the season is kind of building towards that. But the next like massive one should really be the Last Alliance. I'm sure they're gonna put in
that's
some
probably,
action like fighting orcs and
oh
stuff
yeah.
like that throughout the seasons. And Sauron and Galadriel are more than likely gonna have showdowns here and there until the
Mhm.
end. But I think it's doing a good enough job of not using that too much of a too much as the crutch.
Because also some of there's two particular scenes in that goes to show that this might be one of the technically one of the best shows out there. the scene where Celebrimbor is just walking along the tower or walking along the wall and you're
Yeah.
seeing like everything that's going on. I thought that was really well done. And then the scene where it's it's showing the scene that Anatar is laying out for Celebrimbor where everything looks fine in Eregion and then it shifts and then you see it's like, oh no, Eregion is like in chaos right now. Like this show really knows what it's doing from a cinematography and like design element.
Hmm.
And I hope that that continues. I just want some of that money to go towards the writing and the character development, but Amazon is really spending some good money on that and the show looks gorgeous, but it's a lot of style over substance. And that's where I want to see maybe a little bit more of an evening playing field in that respect.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't know much about the new writers that they've brought on for season three, but I think that purging the writers' room kind of is an indication they know something wasn't working. So there's that at least. We'll see how different it looks. As for the when Anatar's walking through and everything's changing, there's a behind the scenes clip that was all done in camera. Like,
Really
yeah, they were like changing the lights and putting mirrors around him and all that, and it was really cool to see that behind the scenes.
nice. Do you have anything else that you want to give the show praise for, or anything you want to talk about when it comes to the future of the show?
I don't really think so. I like we've been saying, there's enough good stuff that's keeping me interested. I just put it in my review that my interest overall is kind of waning.
Mhm.
But if some, like we mentioned, a couple specific issues are remedied even a bit, not even like completely taken care of, but just like tweaked and made at least a little bit better, even if the issues are still there, I could still be very much on board and just at the end of 5 seasons be like, you know what? I'm glad I got a second age Middle Earth show because just on a wider level, there was when the Tolkien estate was shopping around the idea of a show, there were chances of just like legitimately MCUifying or Star Warsifying it where it was just going to be like, and here's an Aragorn show, and here's a Legolas show, to go this route instead of remaking the movies even was another thing that was pitched by other studios. Like this is the sort of route that I'm glad that they went. So I
Hmm.
just like I'm glad with the premise. I just want it to be followed through by an execution. I think the pieces are there for that to happen.
I agree. At the end of the day, am I gonna watch this to the end? Yes, absolutely. Am I gonna hate myself watching it towards the end? I hope not. And
Yeah.
there's enough here, like you said, that it still has my interest because what they're doing really well, they're doing excellent, but what they're not doing well, it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And I'm I'm hopeful that the changes that they'll make moving forward will ultimately lead to a better end product, but there's still enough here to where I will keep going and I will forge on because it's of interest to me. Unlike other shows like House of the Dragon, I'm ready to give up on it.
Oh yeah.
I watched both seasons. Not a fan of season two because it's just aimless and I don't know where it's going. And then the Fantastic Beast, I don't the series, I don't want to talk about them because it's like you you had a five kind of similar to what Amazon's doing. They wanted five movies and they didn't even get to four because they just realized that yeah, this is and now they're just retreading Harry Potter with the
Yeah.
series. So we'll see how that pans out. Well, Robert, thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Do you have anything you want to plug? And where can the people find you if they want to talk to you more about Lord of the Rings or any other pop culture stuff?
Yeah, I'll just briefly plug Robert's thoughts on Letterboxd, my account. You mentioned at the top, also see podcasts and of course anything and everything Sip Pop related. Uh, I always enjoyed chatting with you, so yeah, this was fun.
Cool. Appreciate appreciate your time. Also appreciate all that you've done for Sif Pop and just getting, shepherding me along
Sure.
with all the Sif Pop stuff. So greatly appreciate that as well.
Yeah, it's been great.
That's going to do it for this episode of SPDM TV. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website soon to be out at spdmcrew.com. Shout out to High Flyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any needs for marketing, logo, or brand standards, contact them at highflyercreative.com. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM Crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, happy watching, friends.